Well, hello and welcome to another fantastic episode of Rural Masterminds where we share love, hope, and inspiration. It's very exciting this morning for me to be jumping on with a friend, David Woods, who's been on his journey and spruiking some of a similar message and understanding that we have such a major challenge in our rural world with bucket loads of money getting thrown at a problem that seems to continue to grow with lots of people raising awareness, but not so much solutions that are working. And I feel like Dave has a few suggestions that I know will resonate and help for people in that space. And I can't wait for this podcast. And I have some beautiful things that will be able to reflect out of this. So firstly, yeah, I'd like to welcome Dave and ask him a bit about his journey from how he's gotten to this spot and space, and then of course the big thing about his Nuffield journey this year. So, welcome, Dave. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks very much, Leon.
Yeah, mate. It's been a bit of a time that we've been going to do this, and that's always happens. But I'm pretty grateful to be here, and especially to share time with you. That's one thing that we can never buy or replace is time. So it seems to get away on us once we get cranking, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, mate. Yeah, it's a very busy, fast-paced world these days.
Absolutely. So probably if I could start with sort of, we'll probably start with where you are now in the rural world and what you're up to, and then we'll bounce backwards into what got you to there, if that's okay. So I know
Yeah,
if you want to share a bit of what's happening in the present with the Nuffield journey and things, that'd be amazing.
yeah, for sure, mate. So yeah, I've got a family farm about 80 kilometres northwest of Gundawindi in southern Queensland, and yeah, run that farm together with my wife Alice, and we've got three kids. We've got James who's 6, and Nick's 3, and Josie's 6 months. So yeah, we've got a full time team of three on the farm, three employees that help us, and we're mostly broadacre cropping. We've got about 250 Angus breeder cattle as well, but yeah, predominantly dry land cropping.
What sort of crops mostly, Dave?
We've got a 5 year rotation, and it's generally barley, chickpeas, wheat, and then we sort of have a long fallow out to sorghum. So yeah, sorghum summer crop, and we do grow a bit of white French millet as a cover crop following the sorghum when we get the right conditions. And then just a bit of forage oats that we use for forage oats and forage sorghum for the grazing operation.
Good stuff. That's awesome. Yeah, and you've been there like your whole life generationally, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's so I'm third generation. My grandfather bought the home block here in 1936, and
Yeah.
yeah, my father bought another adjacent place to it in 1977, and yeah, I took over the family farm in 2018, and just in time for the 2019 and 20 drought, which was yeah, we've had plenty of droughts before, but that was an absolute ripper. So we still laugh about that. How my old man threw me a pretty good hospital pass there, but
Mm.
it was actually probably a good thing in hindsight, because Alice and I were new to running a business independently, and haven't built the business. We inherited it, but it really shaped our risk profile right from the get go. It was sort of like, so you want to have a shot at running a business, do you? We'll try this, and
Mm.
went into this massive cash flow crunch. So that was, yeah, that was interesting. And I guess life's always got a lot going on. So yeah, I guess to take a little step back from that, we got married in 2017, and James was born in 2019. So sort of in the middle of the drought. So we were yeah, I guess almost the stereotypical little family starting out in sort of
Mm.
brutal conditions with a little family. But yeah, but things have picked up considerably since then, and we're very fortunate. The last few seasons have been quite good, and we've got another good one at the moment.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a big topic, the generational farming and wealth side of it, because it's going to sneak up really fast to 100 years. So it's fantastic that you're still there, and it's also another area of struggle in. our modern day rural, it's hard to stay in it for generations. It's hard to continue. It's hard to find enough wealth to be able to pass it on and so on. And yeah, it's getting eaten up by corporates and so on too, which we'll probably talk about. But I'd just love to probably dive into what's been your biggest challenge in life, and then yeah, it'll roll into some of the things with drought and some of the things. But as you probably know, it comes back to ourself internally, as we know.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, to rewind a little bit, the biggest challenges that I've faced sort of dates back to, I guess, in my sort of mid to late 20s. I was probably like most other young blokes in this sort of region. I was working on the farm and enjoying a lot of social activities, and going to the races and the rugby and water skiing and all those sorts of things. And life was pretty good, but yeah, there sort of ended up being a bit of a slow decline for me that I didn't really pick up on for a little bit. But it was probably in and around some sort of pretty solid drinking, sort of drinking more and more, which I just sort of brushed off as being, that's what you do in your 20s. Like we all, we're a
Yeah.
fairly big drinking sort of a culture, and sort of brushed it aside. But looking back now, I understand with much more clarity now that was the lead up. That was a bit of a trying to numb some pain that I was sort of
Mm.
unaware of.
Mm. That's kind
Yeah,
of what I thought of, and if you're open to sharing, like, what were the pain points that were being, smeared, as I'd say, uh, that created that, let's call it depression, because I think the awareness around that sounds really interesting, and I think you're absolutely onto it, and so many aren't aware when that's happening, and then when we hit the hole, like it's a bit late.
yeah, that's it. That's absolutely how it was for me too, Leon. I have the awareness now because I've subsequently done a lot of work, but at the time I had very little awareness, and that I guess the feeling that something wasn't quite right, I just sort of stuffed down inside in a box, and didn't really know what it was or didn't understand it, and just kind of, I guess, almost pretended it wasn't there. But it just grew and grew and grew, and it sort of started to rob more and more capacity. So I guess it got harder to just the day to day sort of stuff. It got harder to remember things, and it got harder to socialize, and it just got more and more uncomfortable, and then got harder to sleep, and so all of these things were sort of compounding. And yeah, I guess it wasn't until it got very bad for me where I sort of had nowhere left to turn, I suppose, or nowhere left to hide it. It was just becoming completely and totally all encompassing and overwhelming. And so, yeah, that was my rock bottom, I guess, was just running out of capacity to be able to deal with it or handle it or hide it, and not
Yeah.
knowing what to do. And I knew that there was this thing called depression, but yeah, it felt different for me though, mate. It was, I knew depression was a thing and was a condition, but I felt, I was like, nah, this is different. This is actually my world coming unhinged, like undone. Like, that deep sense of being a real failure was so overpowering. And yeah, I didn't exactly, I mean, I kind of sort of felt, understood, I guess, consciously that, oh, yeah, this must be some form of depression, but it just felt so real. Like it just felt that, it wasn't just a condition, a chemical imbalance. It was actually everything falling apart. So, so yeah, that took me to rock bottom, which was, a really brutal and terrifying place to be. And I guess, that stage of desperation is where I started to look for
Mm.
answers, and yeah, started down the conventional path of treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Depression's certainly doesn't discriminate. And when we think, there's a lot of talk of mental health, and then we probably have all sort of judged or labeled that we won't ever have that because that's for other people, right? And depression isn't at all like limited to somebody that has, been beaten to a pulp or whatever, been through drug abuse or all this. It's an everyday type of situation, and I feel like until we really deeply discover who we are, it's pivotal to all of us, because even in the word depression, it's we're needing deep rest from some character that we're pretending to be, running from ourselves. And I feel that in that space, there's so much pain. I've experienced it too, where you can't even breathe, right? And this is why I'm going to mention this, because I talk to a lot of people going through it, and I want them to know that there is ways out that aren't talked about in mainstream. But the feeling is, so clouded, so overwhelming that you can't breathe, that there's this blackness, this heaviness, and you don't feel like it's going to end. Which is why we're in that state, want life to end, because we think that's the only way. And I want people to know there is other ways. So, yeah,
Yep.
how did you come? I know it was a bit of a journey we'll dive into, but thanks for sort of sharing that it was, thanks for sharing that it was basically so hard to uncover that person that you were underneath that, and
Yeah.
to like find answers. And of course, as you said, you went down the normal convention path. I suppose in that there was probably a far out, this is not working, what else can I do? Like a bit of a search and seeking.
Oh,
Which you've
absolutely.
been down
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Well, the most confusing thing for me about it was there was no clear apparent reason why it was happening. So, it wasn't related to drought. It wasn't related to financial matters. It wasn't really related to relationship or family. Like, it was really difficult for me to put my finger on where is this coming from. Like, what's creating this? And I know it's different for everyone, and life has some extremely stressful events, and it's probably a bit clearer in other people's cases. But for me, it was really quite strange. I couldn't put my finger on what was generating it, and that, I guess there was a fair sense of fear that arose in that. But that was, yeah, it was that was probably one of the greatest challenges, I suppose. And I started down the conventional treatment path, and went to see a GP and got onto some medication. But I just felt that over time, being on medication, something didn't intuitively make sense about that. I sort of thought, why have I, lived my life for 25 years and never needed medication, never had this chemical imbalance, and then all of a sudden there's this theory that all of a sudden something's out of whack. And I thought, what?
Yeah.
How? Like, what created that? Why has this happened? Or is it just something that I have to accept and move on with? And I guess the mainstream narrative sort of was trying to convince me that, oh, this is just genetic, or it's just what happens to some people. It's a bit like diabetes. You just sort of get it, and then you have this medication, and you just manage it. You just learn to deal with it. And that just didn't sit very well with me, and I wrestled with that for quite some time. And yeah, I guess I did get some answers from the conventional treatment, like medication. It did take away the immediate intensity, which was important because I could barely function by the time I got to that point. Then I got referred to to some professionals, and started a bit of a process going down that road, but probably didn't. I guess I didn't really meet the right ones or speak to the right kind of people, because it just didn't really gel with me. I just wasn't hearing the right things, and somehow rather intuitively I knew that there must have been more to this puzzle that I was trying to solve. And I guess that's what sort of led me down a different pathway. So I've often sort of framed it in the past, I suppose, that there's kind of three major levels. Well, there was for me to my recovery. The first one is overcoming the intense pain, because you just almost can't function at all until you do something about the pain. And I think the conventional system is probably not too bad from that perspective, because it does have some ways to help you deal with the pain. But there's a paradox in that. You've got to be careful, because once you deal with the pain, that also can inadvertently take away the incentive to do, to keep trying other things to solve the puzzle.
Just pause on that, because it's so important, and I'm going to reflect that. That's really good. Really good. Sorry to cut in. I just feel like that's really, really important, and I got a lot out of that. Just nearly taking this like framework, because if you need to go down that path and you get on medication, that's up to the individual. And but what you said was really pivotal. Thanks. You've got a good way with words, and I feel like that's really important for the listener to understand that. Know that then you may feel okay. And I've seen this when you start doing some work on yourself with coaching and things, is that it's like we're all good. I don't even need another session, like, and then we just throw it out the window. And it can be the same with that. And I feel that then it bites you a bit harder the next time and the next time. And I've done this and gone, yep, we're sweet, but we're not dealing with the fucking root cause. This is the problem with medication. So I'll let you dive in and finish, but just take that on, listeners, that's only step one if you go down that road, and there's more steps. So sorry, I got excited on that.
No, good that you pulled me up on that, because it is an important point. And I made that mistake many times. I took the medication, I felt better, and I threw it in the bin, and I was like, I'm done now, I'm sorted.
We're fixed.
Fixed.
Sweet.
That's all I needed to do. So, and then crashed again. I thought, fuck. And so I went back to the GP, medication again, onto the medication, felt better, threw the medication in the bin. I went through that cycle multiple times. And that's the issue is that I guess the first step, back to what I was saying before, is dealing with the pain. And the second step is talking to professionals and talking to experts and starting to find out more about the problem. That's a very important second step. But the third step, the most empowering step, and the one that really set me free permanently, forever, was becoming the expert, becoming the professional. And I didn't even know that was a stage. I didn't know that stage existed. But that's the stage that completely and totally liberated me. And that's a stage that flies very much in the face of the mainstream narratives. They're very much against it. And, when I first heard of that, it was like, there's this concept that you can collapse this problem entirely and it will never, ever, be invited back into your life ever again. And that was very difficult for me to believe initially, but I met some people who'd done it, who'd achieved it. And, it had been 10 years, 15 years, and they'd never had a depressive episode in that time frame. And they just knew that they never would. And that really intrigued me. And I thought, wow, what is that? How do you get to that space? And, how can you reverse engineer it, I suppose? And the real key in that for me was, I guess, taking on some responsibility and realizing that I have this problem and I created this problem, not intentionally, not consciously, but somehow I've created this problem. And if I was able to own that level of responsibility, it gave me a lot of empowerment, because if I created it, then I can also uncreate it. I can reverse engineer it. I can dissolve it. But that was so much more effective than believing that this was some genetic thing that, or something that blew in on the wind and it was just bad luck or whatever, because that implies that I can't do anything about it. But once I learnt that I actually can do something about it, it started to get exciting, mate. And that lit a fire in me of hope and curiosity. And that little flame just started to burn brighter and brighter. As with your journey, similar story. As I found out more and more pieces of the puzzle, and I started to click the Rubik's cube, and it started to make sense. And it was it was a journey. It was quite a journey. But I put more and more pieces of the puzzle together, and then I realised where it came from. I realised what created it, and mate, that changed everything. I got to the root cause effectively and collapsed the problem. And it's been collapsed for a long time now. I guess, probably, 15 years or something like that. And I just know it'll never be a problem again, which is that's a bold thing to say for someone who's struggled with it for quite a while. But I just know. I can't explain how I know. I just know. It's just It's this all
That's
encompassing feeling.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that it's really empowering for the listener, and maybe also a bit like, oh, how does that work? Like, how could that work? I don't agree with you, and that's good. That's if you're in that state listening, I want you to know that then you hopefully will have a spark of how do I find that? How do I get that? Because I really like to think of, instead of even when you suggested uncreating the situation, how about transforming it?
Mm.
Because we are energy. There's no denying that. Science will prove it. However, energy can't be destroyed, so we can only transform something, and that's if you simplify an emotion, we need to transform them instead of fucking them off, so to speak. We can't deny or get rid of them or push them away. We just need to transform them, and that sounds like what you've done is transformed a situation into something else. So, is there something you can speak into that might resonate with people grasping? And for me, I feel like that point is that total self-reflection and accountability.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a quote by Kerwin Ray when you were just talking there before, and something about emotions. How emotions are a bit like kids. You don't really want them driving the car, but it's probably not a great idea to stuff them in the boot either. So you've sort of got to be able to handle them. And I guess I learnt along the way that there's a message in emotions. You don't your body doesn't just send you random feelings for no reason, which is what it seemed like when I first started straight.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
But there's a meaning behind it. There's a reason, and it's trying to get your attention. And I guess where my my transformation started to really gather some momentum was when I first started down this journey. I started to realize that the problems that I was dealing with weren't in the conscious realm. So, our conscious mind, like our regular sort of analytical, logical mind that we spend, that's basically runs our day-to-day life. That the problem wasn't in that sort of arena. And I was looking for it there and I couldn't find it. I couldn't put my finger on it because I was looking in the wrong place. And at the
Yeah.
time, I started to learn about the subconscious or the unconscious mind, and I had no idea about any of this. I had no understanding of psychology. I was just a regular farmer who really didn't give a shit about any of this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
But
Yeah.
I had to if I was going to turn things around for myself. It was important that I started to explore it. So yeah, I guess I started to understand that I was looking in the wrong area, and I realised that the problem that I was trying to solve um, was in the unconscious, not in the conscious. That
Mm.
explains why I couldn't tell you where it was coming from. Because if it was a conscious problem, I'd sort of say, yeah, this is what's causing it. But it was deeper than that. It was another level deeper. So
Mm.
I found a platform or an avenue that could help me understand and explore that. And then I found that it was possible to be able to delve inside the unconscious operating system and make some changes there. And I didn't know that was possible either. But once I started to understand that this problem had been created in the unconscious operating system, then I realized, well, how do I get inside that, or how do I delve into that in order to be able to make some changes? And that was essentially the whole essence of my journey, I suppose. And that's quite a journey. That's not
Yeah.
something you do overnight, but it's a very powerful one, because being able to change things on that level, it just changes things on autopilot. So
Like a
people,
diagnostics tool, really, isn't it? And
yeah,
yeah, I feel like in that, the beautiful part for rural people is we are pretty good at diving into problem solve. And I felt when you said that in the start there, that you didn't really care about those things because it wasn't your problem. And I feel like we've all had that in certain areas of life. And so if people listening can refer this to wanting to be an employee or an employer, I'd always rather be the employer. I like being the boss, and that's what we've got to realize about ourselves is we are the boss of ourselves. And if we're having the employee mentality, we're giving the reins to someone else. And well, not my problem, not my tractor. I'm not going to service it. However, if we treat it like it's our baby, hence aka ourself, then we're the employer and the master of ourself instead of giving the reins over to someone else.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I think it's you know, trying to change behaviour, as opposed to trying to change where you're coming from is a huge part of it. And one of the lessons that I learnt along the way was, they talk about the concept of be, do, and have, and what are the things in life that you would like to have, and what do you need to do in order to achieve those things, and then the whole thing sort of gets governed by who would you need to be. And I found a lot of my initial struggles trying to sort this problem out were aligned with what do I need to do. So it was very much the do. I was sort of thinking, well, what behaviours do I need to do, or what do I need to implement on a day-to-day basis? But all of that sort of the regular stuff that we do each and every day is very much governed by who we believe ourselves to be. And I think, most of us sort of get that a little bit back to front, and I certainly did. And, it was a real struggle, because I was trying to, how do you think your way out of a problem you didn't think yourself into?
Yeah, and identity in that piece there is really important, I think, and then creating the identity you want to be. So yeah, fire away,
Yeah. So I think, so I ended up with this identity that wasn't sort of serving me very well, or, had some problems attached to it, and had never really looked into that, or never really sort of questioned the identity itself. And as you said before, Leon, the word depressed being broken up into the two sections of deep rest. And yeah, absolutely, that's a significant part of the journey, was learning to take a deep rest from who I had been, who I was showing up as, who I thought I was, that sort of version of identity. It was time to, I guess, to upgrade that, or challenge that, and think a little bit more about who I would like to be, or who am I really at the core. So yeah, it's a bit of a shift there, and I think it can be initially a little bit tricky to get your head around, but the important point is realizing that a lot of these problems are coming from a deeper level, that it's not surface level. We've really got to be able to reach in a little bit further to find some of the root causes, the answers that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's right, mate. And in that identity piece, I feel like there's a huge conversation, because I resonate with that so heavily. I've collapsed and had to, by default, my identity many times, and I feel, are very addicted to our identities, because the ego runs it and it wants to supposedly keep us safe, because we feel like we're dying if we actually lose our identity. Hence, why we get in such a hole. So if we understood and explored our identity underneath it as a core thing, I feel like that's probably a really big area and a big challenge for men when that identity shifts. And that can be as much as even becoming married happily, but you used to be single and free, or the opposite, getting divorced by the matters that take us through life. So that identity piece, I'd love to speak into more with you, because it's what I feel a lot of people go through, is a collapse of it, and then we hold on so freaking damn tight to the old one that potentially doesn't serve us, as you know, yeah, and recreating a new one's important.
Yeah, it is, mate, and it's a tricky one initially, because when I first started to learn about this, when I first started to heard about it, about an identity and an ego and whatever, I sort of thought, what do you mean an ego? Like, I'm just me. Like there was this
Yeah.
concept that the little voice that you can hear in your head isn't you. And I thought, what? How many people are in there? Like, if it's not me,
Yeah, there's a few.
yeah, that's right. Who else would it be? But I heard a quote there recently that summed it up pretty well. And it said, it's not you. And the reason why it's not you is because if it was, why would there need to be a voice in the first place? Who's the voice talking to? Who's it trying to convince? And that was a bit of an aha moment, because I thought, gee, that's tough to argue with that one. So a little voice that's making all these suggestions, then you start to realize that, okay, maybe that's this thing called an ego, and then you've got the ability to be able to separate the separation of the concept of ego, who you think you are, and then the real you, who you actually are at the core. And so that was, I guess I got started down that process and thought, okay, all right, so maybe the ego, maybe the thoughts that I'm having aren't reality. Maybe they're not actually true. Maybe they're just my interpretation of reality. So it starts to create a little bit of separation. And, I guess for me, it was the realization that I was trying to put my finger on the problems. Where would these problems come from? And I was looking in the wrong place, mate. And in my personal circumstance, it's different for everyone, but in my personal circumstance, a lot of the problems that I was that helped me understand my dynamic, they actually weren't in the last 2 or 3 years or 5 years. They were actually back when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and I never would have thought to look there. And I didn't necessarily have all that. My childhood wasn't what I would call traumatic, but it does. All of us have various things that happen to us in childhood, good, bad, and ugly. That's just life. But the really important part for me that I stumbled across was realizing that when these things happen to you in childhood, as they do to all of us, and some of us have very traumatic childhoods, others not so much, but it's not so much what happens to you, it's far more about what you believe about yourself as a result of that event happening.
Yeah, and on that, why is it such a thing that these problems come out of childhood? Like I have my take on it, but for people going, oh no, exactly, that's really important. Like, oh, my childhood was good, I had a good upbringing, good parents, but as like, why is it that it comes out of childhood? Always it does, and people don't realize that, and then they deny that could be an area for them to look at.
Yeah, that's right. And I was probably a bit the same, mate, to be honest. I was like, nah, it's got nothing to do with my childhood. That was bloody, it was 30 something years ago. How on earth could that have anything to do with any of this? But it was like building a high rise building, or building anything for that matter. And it's I guess once you start to delve into the principles of psychology, it's an unavoidable fact that when we're 0 to 7 in the psychological imprint period, and then there's another one after that. But in that period, we are building our psychological foundations. That's just a fact, and that foundation is what we end up building our identity and our personality, and that this sort of dictates our whole life. So, for me, I was probably up to I might have been up to the 20th story or something. And I'm getting some cracks in the walls, and the doors are out of alignment. And I thought, what's going on? Like, the last few floors I've built, I've put a lot of effort into, and I know they're built right. So I can't understand this. But it was the foundations, and it's not that the foundations, weren't built. They were, but there was some defects in the foundation I didn't know. And what it comes back to is psychological safety, and the sense of psychological safety. And this deep-seated sense of knowing that you'll be okay no matter what. And, that's a direct product of your association with your parents. It's a direct product of parental love and basically, a deep sort of unconditional love. But when that gets misinterpreted, and it's not because it wasn't there, it's not because, your parents did something to you. I'm not implying that. It's just if it's misinterpreted and misunderstood, there can be some cracks that form there, not conscious cracks. For me, I wasn't aware of them. And I think for most people, you're probably not aware of them, but these unconscious cracks that form deep in who you are, deep in your identity. And they in my case, that was where the rot started. That's where the seed was planted that caused the problems. And this identity that I misidentified myself with started to sit there in the background, and I was completely oblivious and unaware of it until eventually, life ended up as a sort of a real mess. And then when I was sort of unscrambling it all, I eventually came back to that and thought, wow, there was actually some cracks that formed way back then. And like I say, it's not really the specific event and how traumatic it was that matters. What really matters is after the traumatic event happened, you know, you could have been getting picked on at school, or it could have been
that's
something
right.
your father said to you. But after that traumatic event happened to you, what did you believe about yourself and who you are as a result of that? And that's
Yeah,
where rot set in.
that's it. That's a perfect analogy. I was also going to mention on it that if in this, some people get the message that, especially for me, that we're out to blame our parents, and it's completely the opposite. It's actually to pinpoint what's gone on and what perception you have placed upon an event. And as you said, like bullying at school, or you might have fallen off the swing and mum was busy with your sibling, so she didn't pick you up when you needed it, and then you're like, oh, nobody cares. So it can be so subtle and so simple. Um, and it's to explore that and to be able to understand it so that we can, change it or transform it.
Yeah, that's right, mate. I think it gets misinterpreted too, Leon. Like, my understanding is when people first come across this concept, there's one trap of pointing the finger at the parents, and it's not about that at all. I mean, every parent's trying to do the. I'm a parent of 3 young kids, and it's bloody hard. We're all trying to do the best we can, and it's not about trying to be the perfect parent. It's not about that at all, and it's also not about wrapping your kids in bubble wrap or trying to, and you think, oh shit, we've been too hard on our kids. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm not talking about being too hard on kids. I think that's a really important distinction to make. It's more insidious than that. It's more subtle than that. And I think a lot of the time in the modern day, it can be as insidious and subtle as us being very disconnected from our kids. A lot of the time we're on our phones, and we're distracted, and we're not connecting with them, which is sort of creating this unconscious message that you are not important to me in this moment or the next moment.
Yeah.
And you think, well, that's not, they should be able to brush that aside, toughen up, kid. It's not that big of a deal. And, I'm not saying that's a sweeping thing that affects all people, but it could be a kid that already has a little bit of doubt that's sown there. That can be the sort of thing that starts to amplify that doubt. And their brain will be looking for examples of evidence to show them how they don't matter. And when they find examples of it, then that will start to solidify the belief and say, there you go, there it is again. There's another part, and it starts to cement this identity, which is it's not accurate, but it starts to create this identity. And, I think that's often the case. And most of us as parents, I certainly didn't know much about psychological safety or what was involved in building it. And I guess someone helped me with that years ago and said, listen, mate, it comes down to 3 pretty key principles. And it's not about just telling your kids this, but it's about them knowing and feeling that you love them, that you're proud of them, and that you've always got their back. And, if you've got those sort of 3 fairly significant keys underpinned, then what we're talking about, is sorted. Basically, that kind of is the founding stones of psychological safety, if you were to put it into a fairly simplified bracket.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to add, because I'm a parent of 2 beautiful daughters, and I'd love to add that parenting is impossible to perfect. It's not actually doable. So I thought that it was so wrong. But we're never going to ever give our kids the perfect framework to believe that they're got it all together either. So what I feel we can give them is exactly those things you just stated. And also, even as they get a bit older, I'm working with my kids on this, is to understand that their perception is their reality, and that they need to dive into that too. Because if they feel that mum or dad didn't love me because of this, that's on them. And to start giving them self accountability and responsibility with these tools really freaking early. Because there's a statement I learned years ago that, no matter what you do, you're going to fuck your kids up. And I was like, bullshit, no way, rah, rah, rah. But it's true, because we can never control someone else's perspective. So therefore, if we can give every individual, even kids, the tools to realize that they form the basis of their identity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about, it's not, as you say, we're all going to mess our kids up. There's no way around that. Like you just,
Yeah,
you
it's a
just
hard
have to
truth to
accept that.
swallow far out.
Yeah, that's right. I've accepted that and moved on. Doesn't matter how much you learn about stuff, you're not going to navigate around that one.
That's
But
for sure, mate.
the important thing is, I reckon, it's not about trying to create a life where kids don't have trauma. In fact,
Mm,
it's the opposite, because life is traumatic.
bound to
Life's
happen.
going to throw some really difficult shit at us
Bloody
all.
oath.
That's just how life works. So
Mm,
it's far more about empowering kids to be able to handle when life throws trauma at you, because
very
kids will
pivotal.
get picked on at school, or they'll go to boarding school and it'll be bloody hard for them. But that they will
Yeah.
always have traumatic events happen to them. But it's about empowering them to be able to handle that. And I think the most critical thing of all, mate, is allowing that belief, that little belief that's forming about who they are, that little belief
Mm,
and that identity piece. It's about helping them understand how important it is to believe in yourself, and to not go down this road of self-doubt. So life's going to slap you around, but don't question your identity as a result of this event that's happened to you. And that's the trap, I think, and it's one that most of us aren't really aware of. But
mm.
it explains the flip side of depression as well. We all know people who have been through extremely traumatic, childhood, or extremely traumatic lives, and have never experienced depression,
Yeah.
of any kind. And that's the opposite of what we're talking about. You think, well, how does that happen? How on earth can someone with so much misery and difficulty in their life not end up in this spiral? And it's the same thing in reverse. It's, I believe anyway, is that somehow in their childhood, either through their parents or through some other people important to them in their lives, brothers and sisters or something,
Mm.
uncle or grandparent,
Yeah.
they developed this rock solid foundation where they just believed that that in who they were. They believed that they believed in themselves and their ability,
Yeah.
and they started to form things like, I'll figure it out, or there must be a way to sort this out. Those little things that sort of start unconsciously end up creating rock solid foundations where life will knock you around, but your knees have something firm to hit.
Yeah.
Whereas what I went through and what you went through, and many of us, when life slapped us around and we started to fall, there was nothing beneath us, and you fall and fall and fall, and you're like, well, shit, where's the net?
Yeah. Diamonds are formed under pressure, and you're dead right. There is a brilliance in a negative situation if we can self-discover and have the right tools to find our way. And that's probably a really good message for people when you're in the shit and in the thick of it. There is some real gold in those situations, and you have to have hope that there is a different side of it.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess, for those of us who missed creating this psychological safety, this sense of foundation in our childhood, what do you do about that? And that was the rest of my story. It was going back and thinking, well, is it too late now to go back and redo the foundations? No, it's not. It's
Definitely not. Yeah.
that's the power, I suppose, of realizing that at any time you can go back and you can shore up those foundations, you can rebuild them. And when you've
Mm.
done that at a a subconscious level, at an unconscious level, that's what gives you this deep seated feeling, which was that this was elusive for me for most of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't have it, but this deep seated feeling that no matter what life does to me, I'll always be okay. I just know it at a deep level. And that, when you have that installed, then you've just, I don't know, you just got this deep seated knowing that you'll get knocked down, but you'll get back up. You just always know it and feel it. Very
That's
vague.
so cool. Yeah, look, that's so cool. It's just brought something to light for me, for the listener as well. Where do you think life would be if you hadn't found these tools, especially in your relationship and your parenting, and on the flip side, how much has this helped in those areas as well as your business?
Oh, massively, mate. Yeah, I mean, I was really on a highway to hell before I figured this stuff out. But I guess as I started to learn a little bit about it, I just got more and more intrigued and fascinated, and I thought, wow, no one's talking about this.
I know, right? It fascinates me too. I'm like, this
Yeah.
stuff's brilliant.
I thought, why isn't everyone talking about this? I don't get it. And because I met people who'd gotten similar results, and I turned my life around, and other people asked me for advice and followed not necessarily the same journey, but they
No,
followed the
that's right.
principles, not the absolute
Yeah,
details and mechanics of what I
100%.
did, but they picked up on the principles. But to answer your question though, from a relationship point of view, it's huge because it's enabled me to understand far more about why I show up the way I do and who am I being, and it's helped me realize that if there's something I'm trying to change, if, for example, I'm trying to get more fit, I'm trying to
Yeah,
incorporate fitness and lose some weight, that sort of stuff, then I can go and do the do. I can go out and have a run, and I can go to the gym. But inevitably, like for almost all of us, we end up losing momentum and it stops. So you end up with this stop-start process. But what's far more empowering, I believe, is focusing on who would you need to be. So what does that person look like who's
mm,
who's going for a run 4 or 5 times a week? And once I understood that the levers that you can pull and the ways that you can make changes to who you are being, then all of the it just runs on autopilot. Like if you're able to do that, and there's clear ways that you can, if you're able to construct that, then you will run in the rain, you'll run at night, you'll run at 2 o'clock in the morning, because
mm,
you identify as a fit person, as a runner. And I guess
yes.
the great thing for my relationship and my kids is I understand how this works. So my kids are in their psychological imprint period, and there's lots of responsibilities as a parent, but I understand the mechanics of how to build psychological safety, and I know that I will do a good job of building that for them. And once that's done, mate, I mean, it's almost like my job
Yeah,
is done here. Like they
yeah,
will go on, and they're smart kids, and they, I'll just be parenting them like any other parent, but and giving them the best opportunity I can. But I just know that if they've got that platform there, that psychological safety foundation, that's the most important part.
mm, yeah,
Anything can
absolutely.
be built on that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I feel like you still can get it later, and my kids are out of the imprint period, and they have had some psychological challenges. That their mum and dad split up, and it's been some battles for them. And now what I'm finding is every single bit of possible tool to deal with that is really important. And it doesn't always work, but it's certainly their journey. And I think that um, you know, it's certainly much easier to frame that in that first 7 years, because once
Mm.
that's happened, then it doesn't matter if you're 10 or 20 or 40, you still can do it, but it's a bit tougher, that's for sure. And the tools are then required to be able to reshape and harness our framework, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right, mate. And if you look at the statistics, there's probably, I don't know, 50, maybe 60% of the population that do develop this psychological safety and this foundation, unbeknownst to them, but they develop it in their childhood. And then the other 40 to nearly 50% of people who end up, with problems with anxiety, addiction, depression,
Mhm.
relationship breakdown, all these sorts of different things, are probably the ones who may have had some cracks in the foundation there. Possibly, this isn't the only cause of what, and I should quantify that or qualify that too. I guess is that um, this is probably a fairly dominant sort of a pattern for a lot of people, but I don't mean to imply that it's the exact pattern for everyone, but yeah, it's pretty. It's certainly very common. And once I understood that, it was a real aha moment for me. And I sort of thought, wow. And then, you sort of think, well, this is interesting because we just said a moment ago that the most valuable time to get it is between 0 and 7. So if it's installed, that's it. You'll never have to think about it ever again. It's just running on unconscious. If it wasn't installed, then in your sort of early teen years, there's another opportunity where it's a little more difficult, but it's possible. And then, as you and I know, in your adult years, it takes a bit of work. I'm not going to lie. Like you do have to roll up the sleeves. But the great thing about rural Australians, though, is that if we know something works and works well, then we're pretty bloody good at that, rolling up the sleeves and think, right, well, if that's what needs to happen, let's get on with it. And all we really need is this rock solid belief that it's worth a shot. And I think the biggest influence I've had on a one-on-one basis is people coming and talking to me, and I'm not trying to pump my own tires up, but they're coming and talking to me and saying, how did you get to where you're at? Because you seem to be not struggling. And I was like, no, I'm not struggling at all. And they're just curious and like, how did you get to that? And I'll say, well, it's a bit of an alternate route. It's a little bit unusual. And they say, oh, look, I'm at the stage where I'm prepared to to look into anything. You think, right, well, that's good. Well, I'll tell you a bit more about the unusual journey and and what's involved. And then people are like, right, if that's what I need to do, let's roll up the sleeves, let's get stuck into it. And then in a short amount of time, and it's usually quite surprising how short that time frame is, things are back on track and you've rebuilt that foundation and your life's very different.
That's really cool. And I actually feel like probably people may ask, where do they find that? And, I'm going to pump my tires up and say that I believe that we have programs that will offer that, but that's up to the individual. And it's not only the road through us, but it's the whole concept of rural masterminds is to be able to collaborate and have a set of these tools that we're talking about actually. And
that's what I love. That's what I love so much about what you're doing, Leon, is I get it's not uncommon to have those conversations. Someone's struggling, their life's not working for them, and they call up or whatever, or send a message and say, what do I do? Where do I go? And it's a tricky, it's a tricky conversation, or it used to be. But now we've got you and the work that you were doing with Rural Masterminds, which is very much aligned with what I did. It was a completely separate time in our lives, but I essentially followed the basically the same set of principles that you did, and it worked very, very well for you, worked very well for me, and dozens of people now that I know, but no one's talking about it, and you think, bloody hell, why is no one talking about it? And then the next question is, where do you go to talk about this or find out about it? And that's the thing, Leon and Rural Masterminds is one of the only avenues I've seen in rural Australia, which is so it's just so good to see it, because it's people are searching for it. They don't exactly know what they're looking for, but when they get started and hear about some of these principles, then I think intuitively you just think, that sounds like something I'd like to pursue.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that, because it hasn't been easy to create these principles in a framework that's going to actually resonate with the rural language, with the wording, with people who are skeptical, people who have been hurt and burnt. And I just want to say on that we're continually cementing more and more things into this future. And we're going to get this message out there through your journey, which we'll touch on now, and my journey future-wise, because they work, Dave, and people need to be able to access them, and people need to know that they are available. And on that, with your journey with Nuffield, I'd love to talk about that a bit, because unfortunately we're on a time frame, and I feel like we probably will need part 2, 3, 4, etc. There's a lot of value when I talk with you. So tell us about that process that you've embarked on since last year, and the mission behind it, what you want to achieve with it. So far away.
The Nuffield Scholarship, and there certainly will be a part 2 of sorts there, because I'm only early on the journey in that space. But I had the opportunity to apply for a Nuffield Scholarship. I wasn't too sure if mental health was exactly a fit within Nuffield. Wasn't too sure it was the right opportunity, but I was I guess very fortunate to find that Nuffield were very much backing that. There's several other scholars this year that are also looking into mental health. So, but it's a very broad topic, and I sort of thought, well, what am I actually trying to figure out within that topic? And I guess to distill it down to one sort of key point, I suppose, is that there's so much being being said, and there's so many organisations active in mental health, and there's significant increases in investment from the government and even the private sector as well. And so there's lots of discussion about it, lots of talk, but the statistics are so stubborn. They are just stuck, and they're actually getting worse. And it's almost hard to believe. We've doubled the investment in the last 10 years, and the stats are getting worse. We all know in rural Australia they are particularly bad. Our statistics are terrible in that space. We're having twice as many problems basically, and so.
So what do you think that is? Like on a I know that's a blanket question. It's probably not easy to really pinpoint, but what's a couple of bullet points on why for you from your perspective on why it's such a big problem?
I reckon my hypothesis, I suppose, is that we're communicating in the wrong kinds of ways. So I think, the mainstream sort of narrative and the main communication on this topic, for whatever reason, it is not connecting with rural Australian men in particular. So I can just focus on that demographic for a 100%. Second. And I know it's affecting, men, women, and across Australia. But that demographic in particular is a particularly tough
resonating.
Track. Yeah, and it's
speaking a different language, should we say? Yeah,
that's right. It's just not connecting. It's not resonating, and it's not. So all of the conversation and all of the discussion about, if you're feeling bad, you should, ring this number. You should reach out to this online platform. You should, go and seek help. Talk to a GP. We've been saying that for a long time, and there is still resistance. People are not doing what we're saying they should do. And there's a pretty clear message in that. And there's got to be reasons behind that. And that's what, a big part of my Nuffield scholarship is to delve in and understand that at a more dynamic level. And, I guess in a sense, it's a little bit like a bit of a rural analogy, I suppose. Low stress stock handling, in that particular instance, we're understanding, we're studying the instincts of the animal, and we're understanding how the animal, why the animal responds the way it does, and how we can effectively communicate to get the desired result in order to get them to tolerate being uncomfortable. And in a similar sort of way, we are speaking the wrong kind of language, and I guess my theory is that it's very disempowering language, and it's kind of this this caricature of being a victim, I suppose, and not having to take full responsibility for it, and not really being empowered with ways to be able to transcend it. And I think that's a significant part of the problem, and it's just not. There's no buy-in. It's a terrible pitch, and people aren't buying what's being sold. The pitch is not effective, and so I think it's largely around those lines. And I'm not necessarily saying we need to reinvent the wheel, but I think we do need to get a lot better at being able to have the conversation in ways that strike a chord, and things like
communication.
Things like breaking the stigma. And
to me, I can't understand her, and it's like that's what we're doing with rural Australia. We're not speaking their language.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. And we just, there's words like awareness and breaking the stigma that we've just done to death. Resilience, mental health and mental illness. To be honest, I hate those words. Depression. I don't like any of the language. And I had a mate of mine years ago that said he came to me with some significant problems, and I said, "What's going on for you, mate?" And he said, "I think the cheese has slid off my cracker." And that was his interpretation, but the point being, though, and I don't think he realised when he said it, was that he was minimising the problem, rather than being this all-encompassing, impossible mountain that you're never going to surpass. He was sort of shrinking it down, and then making it, I guess, almost a joke out of it, in a sense that how can we get this show back on the road? But language is supremely important, and I think that's what made all of the difference for me, was learning essentially a different language in terms of how does your unconscious mind work, learning language about psychology, and then through that understanding, it changed everything. So I think at least to be able to get people to engage in the first place,
for
because
sure.
if we can't get engagement, I mean,
Yeah,
where do you start?
that's right. Yeah, I love etymology and analogy, and I feel like there's a lot of good ones that I've even gotten from you too, and the cheese off the clacker or ego. I feel I've created for that, that we're essentially gotten off track from our truth, from our authenticity and our purpose, or mental. I feel like men don't do anything until it all blows up. So we've got to understand ourselves on a maintenance basis that this shit is actually quite fun if you and compare it to low stress stock handling or looking after your machinery and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's I guess the main part or significant part of the Nuffield is understanding the language and the limitations of it, and then another aspect of it is wanting to delve into the areas. If we think about solving mental health from a holistic sort of a perspective, what are the elements? What are the principles that we're not delving into that we're sort of avoiding? And I think from my own perspective, the understanding of the unconscious mind and how it works, that's one that is not it's not very easy to delve into, shall we say. It tends to not get a seat at the table. It tends to get put into the too hard basket.
Yeah.
Why is that? Like if that's where you found a fair few of your answers, and that's where I found a large majority of my answers, why is it not getting a seat at the table? Why aren't we talking about that?
Would you like me to get really nasty and tell the truth on that?
Yeah, and I
maybe,
have some
maybe we
strong
won't go into that this podcast, but yeah, obviously there's a lot of stuff not working with major benefits to big corporation and organizations, as always say. But yeah, and then that does come back to the individual self accountability that we cannot hone in on enough. That nobody's coming to rescue you. Nobody will even help in your rescue unless you participate.
And then that takes us back to that quote that you and I both love, which is that rural blokes don't need to be saved or rescued; they just need knowledge of their own power and how to access it. And I think that's where that's probably what made the most significant difference for me was the realization that if we're talking about intrinsic beliefs for a rural male, one of the strongest ones is they want to be able to do things themselves. They want to be able to do things independently. And the paradox is with this kind of problem, you do need some, you can't just solve it yourself, otherwise there wouldn't be a problem in the first place. But so you do need some assistance. But where most of the heavy lifting happens is you do need to do most of it yourself because you're talking about your own mind.
Look at a 5-year-old boy, especially a rural kid. Don't you dare take over. Let them have a go and show them how. Like that's who we are, especially as males. We want to fix, we want to problem solve. So give a man the set of tools to be able to do that with some guidance.
Yes.
And he's a fucking powerhouse.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's one of the most significant messages that, probably needs to be reframed, and perhaps why so many people balk in the first place, because very foreign for a rural bloke to go and seek help in a disempowering sense and say, I can't sort this out. Well, in actual fact, you can sort it out. You will sort it out. You just need to know the language and the tools that are most effective for you. And then away you go, because if we're talking about the unconscious operating system, and it's a very, very complex machine, and for someone else to be able to navigate that complexity and be able to to put all the pieces of that Rubik's cube together, and if it's as a therapist in 1 hour a week, I mean, I take my hat off to any professional, but that's a big challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly why we want to normalize a different environment, because it's not an overnight thing. It's a way of living. And you said about the identity. If you want to be a runner, then you've got to identify with that. And it's the same as being able to be a self-accountable. I don't know if I like the word heal, but a person who knows how to deal with their stuff, and let's say an emotionally intelligent person. Like that's what I talk about, is that you have to identify with the things that are that. You can't be, hiding behind some persona and then go home and yell at your kids. You need to embody who that is to deal with your stuff.
That's right. That's a great point you make there too, mate. And something I mentioned once previously was, the someone asked me once upon a time and said, how do you avoid depression these days? Like, how do you, when you wake up in the morning, how do you stave off depression? And my response was, I don't. It's unconscious now. It's on autopilot. But what's, I guess, the flip side of that is I am being emotionally intelligent. So, through the awareness I've raised, emotional intelligence has become a part of who I am. It's part of my identity now. So I'm far more attuned to my needs far earlier than I ever was in the past. If something's doesn't feel right and a code's coming up on the dash, I'm in tune with it so much earlier than I ever used to be through emotional intelligence.
Mate, that's gold. All of this has been such gold, and I actually feel like that is even pivotal too, because how do you keep depression away? Yeah, absolutely you don't. You sit there and have a conversation with it and you say, what are you missing? What's lacking, right? Because you know, we can't ever have one without the other, but if we're depressed, what is missing? Are you missing connections, love? Are you missing joy, fulfillment? Are you missing purpose? What, what,
Mm,
what are you just missing? Good fucking quality food, sunlight, and rest. Deep
mm,
rest, right? Like
yeah.
something's missing in the equation, and there's always the chance every day of having the negative, the depression. So yeah, but you don't have to force and fight it away, because then it's going to come stronger and knock harder.
Yeah, that's right. And I think once you solve the root cause, once you get to the absolute mechanics of how it was created, once you've collapsed that, then there is nothing for what I would call depression. The unbridled, overwhelming emotions that we all sort of familiar with that take that you can't sort of pause.
Mm,
That thing, whatever that is, that feeling, it has no place to attach itself to in your life anywhere anymore. There's literally nowhere it can plug in. And
yeah,
that's why, myself and other people are at this sense where, yeah, we'll feel a range of emotions. I will feel sad. There's times where I'll feel grief and loss and all of those natural emotions. But the one that we're talking about, that rampant runaway depression, I'll never feel that ever again, because there's nowhere for it to attach itself to. There's no unconscious plug for it to be able to plug into. It's been replaced with this sort of emotional intelligence. So, yeah, that's a very liberating place to arrive at.
that's cool, mate. All of it. It's all been very good value as always, and I feel like there's been so much in here that hopefully people will grab onto even their own little piece, because uh, this is an ongoing journey, and it's certainly a space that's really growing, and there is getting some traction in this world of hopefully a different set of tools in the bush. And your journey inspires me with the Nuffield Scholarship. And probably just one last question would be, what would you like to see happen out of that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a few pieces to the journey for me, but I'm early in this journey, so there's lots more questions than answers at this point. But
Of course.
I really believe that a peer network, a peer-to-peer network where people
Yeah,
can
I
have
love that.
these sorts of conversations is one of the absolute fundamental principles that I
Yeah.
think needs to happen in mental health. And it's got to be carefully constructed, but we've seen some very powerful examples of how effective that model is with Steph Trethewey with Motherland and Shanna
Mm,
Wan with Sober in the Country. They are having both of those women are having some really significant success with that model. And I think if it's carefully built, and we can have one that perhaps that's designed for rural men, it might have to be specific. Perhaps there's multiple different versions, but
mm,
being able to talk to other people who have been through what you're going through.
yeah.
And the great thing about peer-to-peer networks, and the other thing, I guess, about sharing stories,
Yeah.
um, is that if you're allowing people to speak their truth and tell their story, there's no arguing with it. If they said that worked and it worked well for them, there's no judgment. You just have to accept it because it's their story. So a big part of the outcome that I'm looking for my Nuffield is to to create my own podcast and share stories of people who have overcome these really difficult challenges, and then utilising that platform as a means for being able to create a peer network, or to be able to invest in existing peer networks, because I think that's a huge part. We need community. We need the humanity and the community that comes with being able to have real conversations. And at the moment, there's just very few places that can happen. I think there used to be in the past, decades ago, with other parts of our society and our community, but it's sort of evaporated. It's gone, and we have a real need for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, it's so good to see you out there sort of holding that torch for the rural world, because we certainly need a lot more of this type of mentality, chats, conversations, and solutions in the bush. Because without farmers, we don't eat. People don't understand that well enough either. And certainly, my mission to give all people, but especially rural farmers and men, a set of tools to make them powerful, so we have a stronger nation, because there's no denying that our nation's in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I think, whatever challenge it is in life that you're facing, if you've been diagnosed with, with some really difficult physical health concern, whatever it might be, the best thing that you can do is go and talk to someone who's been through it. Go and talk to someone who's got the result you're looking for.
Yeah.
And, that's a huge part of it. And, it'll save a lot of time, and yeah, to be able to have a network where you've got several people who have faced similar challenges. There's just so much insight and wisdom, and the best thing about it, mate, is that they will talk to you in a way that you understand. They'll talk your language, and you don't have to translate or put it in different terms. You can relate to each other, and there's a whole unspoken language too. I mean, you've been through your battles, I've been through mine. We get each other. Before we, when we first met each other, we already got each other because we
Totally.
realised what each other had been through. So there's just
Yeah.
this really powerful connection that just cuts through, and you're far more likely, I believe, to gain some really significant wisdom from that sort of environment.
Yeah, 100%, mate. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's all been fantastic. Unfortunately, have to get rolling and wrap it up. But it's, as I say, there'll definitely be more parts to this, because it's an ongoing journey, and I always get a lot of value out of this, and I know the listeners will too. So thank you so much for sharing your time. And if anyone wants to follow your journey within the Nuffield space, where would they find that?
Yeah, I've got a few different options on LinkedIn, just as
Yeah.
David Woods on LinkedIn. And if you do a search for Nuffield David Woods, you'll see a bit more about my Nuffield
Cool.
project there. And then also
Yeah.
on Instagram is the Rural Reverence Journey. That's where I'm providing updates for the trip.
Awesome, mate. I can't wait to keep following that myself and keeping in touch. And thank you so much for your wisdom. I know it's hard to find anyone's time. We're all busy, so really appreciate you being on here. This has been another amazing episode of Rural Masterminds with Dave Woods. Thanks for listening, guys. Have an amazing day.